Today I'm going to show you the family tree of Portuguese monarchs, all the way from the first king in the 12th century down to the last king in the 20th century. I'll be using the latest version of my European royal family tree chart, which is now available from my website, usefulcharts.com. In an earlier video, we covered the Spanish monarchy, which is now shown in bright red. But in this video, we're just going to look at the Portuguese monarchy, which is shown here in the green. So we're going to start with King Afonso I, who was the first king of Portugal. And the first thing I want to explain is the difference between these two houses of Burgundy. The first royal dynasty in Portugal was the House of Burgundy, and at the same time, there was also a House of Burgundy ruling in Spain over the kingdoms of Castile and Leon. But surprisingly, these two houses are not the same, and in fact, are not even related. To explain, let's look at a map of France in the 12th century. This general area here is the region of Burgundy. And it used to be its own kingdom, but by this point was part of other kingdoms. This part here, now this map is in French, so this word here is the French word for Burgundy. This part was now the Duchy of Burgundy and was part of France. Whereas this part here was the County of Burgundy and was part of the Holy Roman Empire. So this part was ruled by a duke descended from the French royal family, and this part was ruled by a count from an Italian noble family. So duchy, duke, county, count. Pretty simple. It was from a Duke of Burgundy that the Portuguese royal family descended, and it was from a Count of Burgundy that the Spanish royal family descended. So let's go back to the family tree chart to see the details. Here we have Hugh Capet, the King of France and founder of the House of Capet, or Capet. He had a son, Robert II, who became King of France after him. And Robert II had two sons who lived to adulthood. His firstborn son, Henry, became King of France, and his secondborn son became Duke of Burgundy. Robert's son, Henry, would have become the next duke, but he died before his father. And he had several sons, the eldest of which became the next duke. But he also had some younger sons, and one of these was Henry, who became the Count of Portugal. Now, why did a French noble end up ruling over in Portugal? Well, this was the time period of the Reconquista, when various Christian kingdoms were trying to win back the Iberian Peninsula from the Muslims. The Emperor of Spain, Alfonso VI, appealed to France for help, and Henry was one of the nobles who joined the battle. After some victories, Henry married one of the emperor's daughters and was named the Count of Portugal. Now this individual here, Raymond of Burgundy, was from a different Burgundy. He was from the County of Burgundy. You can see his ancestors here and how the line actually goes back to Italy rather than France. He also married one of the daughters of the emperor, and that daughter ended up becoming empress. And so the throne of Spain therefore eventually passed to his house of Burgundy when his son, Alfonso VII, became emperor. So to recap, the Spanish House of Burgundy has its roots in the County of Burgundy, and therefore the Italian nobility, whereas the Portuguese House of Burgundy has its roots in the Duchy of Burgundy and the French nobility. So let's look at Portugal. Henry's son Afonso managed to get permission from the Pope to make his territory independent from Spain, and hence became the first king of Portugal. His son became king after him, and then a grandson. Then we get an unpopular king who was deposed and replaced by his younger brother. And it's at this point that the Algarve became part of Portugal. And so from this point forward, the kings of Portugal are known as the King of Portugal and the Algarve, or later King of Portugal and the Algarves, plural. So the line then passed to his descendants, and you can see there were several marriages into the Spanish royal family. We then come to Pedro I, or in English, Peter I, and I'll point out that for a brief period of time, there are actually 3 King Peters ruling on the Iberian Peninsula at the same time. There was King Peter IV of Aragon, King Peter of Castile, and King Peter I of Portugal. Peter I, or Pedro I, was followed by his son Fernando I. And around this time, there was a civil war in Castile between these two half-brothers. And in the end, the throne ended up passing to the House of Trastamara. Now, it's not shown on this chart, but King Peter of Castile had 2 daughters who married 2 English princes, Lionel, Duke of Clarence, and John, Duke of Lancaster. And because of this, John, Duke of Lancaster, made several attempts to take the throne of Castile. Fernando I, King of Portugal, supported him in this, setting the stage for an alliance between England and Portugal, which is actually an alliance that has remained intact to this very day. Eventually, though, Portugal and Castile made peace, and Fernando's daughter married King John I of Castile as his second wife. And there was a plan to make the thrones of Castile and Portugal unite, kind of like what later happened with Aragon and Castile. And if that had happened, history might have been a bit different. But it did not happen, because after Fernando I died, his half-brother John eventually became king. And this brought to an end the Portuguese House of Burgundy and established a new royal house, the House of Avis. And this name comes from a military order that John belonged to. King John is remembered as John the Good because he was responsible for maintaining Portugal's independence. It was under the House of Avis that Portugal reached its peak of power. During the reign of John the Good, the Portuguese captured Ceuta, thus marking the beginning of the Portuguese Empire. And although the throne passed to his son Duarte, or Edward in English, it was one of his other sons, who's not shown on the chart, Henry the Navigator. He was a son of King John the Good, and Henry the Navigator was known for initiating the European Age of Discovery. But we're mostly focusing on monarchs here. So after Edward came Alfonso V, and he started to acquire lands for Portugal in North Africa. And then we get his son John II, often considered the greatest Portuguese monarch of all time. It was during his reign that Portugal began exploring further around Africa and into Asia. He was also the one who signed the famous Treaty of Tordesillas, and let's take a quick look at that. The Treaty of Tordesillas drew a line on the world map and said that Spain could claim all the lands on this side of the line and Portugal on this side of the line. And of course, the indigenous people living in all those lands didn't get a say in this. Back to the family tree chart. Unfortunately, King John II's heir died in a horse riding accident, so the throne went to his cousin, Manuel I. During Manuel's reign, the Portuguese landed in Brazil, and during the reign of his son, John III, a colony in Brazil was established. Brazil, of course, went on to become Portugal's main overseas colony. John III outlived his son, and so when he died, the throne passed to his grandson, King Sebastian. and then tragedy struck. Sebastian died in battle before marrying or producing any heirs, so the throne went to his great uncle, who was a cardinal in the Catholic Church and therefore celibate. And there were no other obvious heirs available after him. And so this led to a succession crisis. And eventually, the throne passes to King Philip II of Spain, who was a member of the Habsburg dynasty. And this is because Philip's mother was a Portuguese princess, the sister of John III and King Henry. So this resulted in what's called the Iberian Union, a period of about 60 years during which the crown of Spain and the crown of Portugal were united. But it came to an end in 1640 when this individual here fought a war against Spain to restore Portugal's independence. And this took place during the same time as the much larger 30 Years' War in Europe, when the Habsburg dynasty's power was starting to decline. So John IV became king and established the House of Braganza, named after his father's dukedom. But you can see that he was also a descendant of the original Portuguese monarchs, and that's why he was able to claim the throne. John IV's first son died at age 19, and therefore his second son, Afonso IV, became the next king. But Afonso IV had poor physical and mental health and was eventually deposed, and his brother, Pedro II, became regent and eventually king, and the line continues through him. We get John V, Jose I, and then the first reigning queen of Portugal, Maria I. She actually married her uncle. These two were brothers. And he took the title king consort, but it was actually Maria who was the monarch. And it was during the reign of Maria that Napoleon Bonaparte was taking over Europe. But as Napoleon was invading their country, Portugal did something that no other country did. Instead of capitulating to him, they moved the entire royal court to their most wealthy colony, Brazil, and continued to operate from there. And Brazil was eventually elevated to the status of a kingdom, and hence Maria reigned as the queen of the United Kingdom of Portugal, Brazil, and the Algarves. She was followed by John VI, who began his reign in Brazil, but then moved the court back to Portugal in 1820. And here's where things get a bit interesting. When John VI went back to Portugal, he left his son Pedro in charge in Brazil. But many in Brazil wanted to be fully independent from Portugal. So they ended up declaring independence as the Empire of Brazil. And Pedro became the Emperor of Brazil, while his father was still king in Portugal. And so from this point, Brazil and Portugal had separate monarchs. Let's look at Brazil first. They actually only had one more monarch, Pedro II, son of Pedro I, who reigned for an impressive 58 years. He was eventually removed from the throne, though, when Brazil became a republic. He lived his final 2 years in Paris in exile. Now today, there are two great-great-great-grandsons of Pedro II who claim to be the current heir to the throne of Brazil. There's Prince Louis and Prince Pedro Carlos. But I don't think Brazil will be reinstating their monarchy anytime soon. Let's go back to Portugal. When King John VI died, Pedro of Brazil was briefly declared king of Portugal as Pedro IV, but not wanting the countries to be reunited, he soon abdicated in favor of his daughter, Maria, under a plan that would have her marry his brother Miguel, who would become king consort, similar to what happened back here. But Miguel wanted to be the reigning king, and therefore he usurped the throne. And this led to a civil war between the two brothers, with Pedro eventually winning and Maria II being made queen. Maria II ended up marrying a member of the House of Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha. You can see that here. And the House of Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha, interestingly enough, is the current ruling house in Belgium and also in the United Kingdom through the husband of Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, although they eventually changed the name of the house to the House of Windsor. In Portugal, however, the house name actually stayed as Braganza after the death of Maria II, and she was succeeded by her son Pedro V and then her son Louis. And Louis was followed by his son Carlos I, who in 1908 was assassinated along with his firstborn son and heir, Louis Philippe. And his second son, Manuel II, therefore became king, but only reigned for 2 years, after which Portugal became a republic. And he spent the rest of his life in London and did not have any children. And there are actually no remaining descendants of Queen Maria II. And therefore, if Portugal ever did want to restore their monarchy, they would actually have to choose a descendant of King Miguel. And the senior-most descendant is this individual here, Duarte Pio, Duke of Braganza. Okay, there you have it, a complete history of the Portuguese monarchy. If you want the chart, head over to my website, usefulcharts.com. To watch videos on the other monarchies shown on this chart and other history-related topics, subscribe to the channel and check out the playlists. Thanks for watching.